And welcome once again to part two of Defending the Faith Against False Claims About Christian History. Last time we looked at some popular, well-known false factual claims that non-Christians often make against Christianity in attempts to provide themselves with gotcha moments. Just to recap, among them, there's no evidence that the Bible is true. Uh, Another, that the biblical canon was established basically on power politics or for power politics reasons, having little or nothing to do with God and biblical truth. Further, that Europeans were the bad guys, evil uh, side during the Crusades, and the other side was supposedly the good guys. That Galileo was a martyr for science and was persecuted by the Catholic Church. So he stands in popular memory, at least among agnostics and atheists, non-Christians, as a scientific hero against the iniquities of the Catholic Church or Christianity in general. And we also talked about the idea that the Spanish Inquisition was uniquely vicious and cruel by European standards of the day. And we showed all of those to be false. Today, we're going to finish up with a couple more factual claims that are not factual in fact, and then we're going to move on to interpretive issues. At the beginning of the first lecture, the last lecture, I told you that this lecture is in two parts. The first part deals with inaccurate factual claims that are used against Christians, and the second part will deal with false or inaccurate, sometimes ridiculous interpretive claims. They make interpretations that just don't hold up. We're only going to focus on two of them for reasons of time, and the second one more than the first. So, without further ado, we will move on to that material. So, two more factual claims. You've probably heard this one if you're a Christian before and ever gotten into some sort of debate or argument or conversation with a non-Christian or non-Christians. But in the ancient and medieval world, as it says at the top, Christians thought the earth was flat. And this is just flat out false. According to Draper and White, the two scholars that are the primary subjects of the Book of Unicorns and Popes, or Popes and Unicorns, excuse me, Christianity was dragged kicking and screaming into modernity by the sheer power of scientific truth, entirely against its sacred will. Dogmatic Christianity, with its naive reliance on the Bible and stubborn opposition to science, had totally messed up. So once again, we see all kinds of hyperbole and extreme statements by these two scholars and many others. These are the two most influential, as we've seen, by far. But the obstinate Christians would not back down to science. According to Professor White, the idea of the Earth's sphericity, basically roundness, still lived, although the great majority of the early church fathers, and especially Lactantius, had sought to crush it beneath the utterances attributed to Isaiah, David, and St. Paul. Unquote. Alan Chapman, an historian of science at Oxford, writes of this type of statement, this way of trying to make Christians look bad, when he says and writes, "Let us be clear about one thing. No medieval scholar of any worth thought that the earth was flat. One needs only to read the astronomical literature of the Middle Ages to realize that the spherical nature of the earth was standard knowledge and taught to university students from Salamanca to Prague." Unquote. Now, that's not to say that there was no one in Europe that thought that the earth was flat, but anyone that was educated for sure knew and had known for quite some time that the Earth was round or spherical. Leslie B. Cormack, another historian of science in Canada, states that, quote, if we examine the work of even early medieval writers, we find that with few exceptions, they held a spherical Earth theory. Among the early church fathers, Augustine, Jerome, and Ambrose all agreed that the Earth was a sphere. Furthermore, Darren Hayton, another historian of science currently, says that the belief that, quote, Columbus's struggles to overcome a medieval church that believed in a flat earth had become historical fact. Historical truth had surrendered to truthiness. Despite decades of historical work and dozens of articles and textbooks, and more recently blog posts, the Columbus myth is alive and well. Once again, it's astonishing that these kind of factual inaccuracies and flat out lies in some cases still are commonly believed, and in many of them, in the case of many of them, are the standard belief in popular culture. Finally, Jeffrey Burton Russell, professor emeritus of history at UC Berkeley. Many authors, great and small, have followed the Draper White line down to the present. The educated public, seeing so many eminent scientists, philosophers, and scholars in agreement, concluded that they must be right. What's astonishing about what Russell says here is that in the Middle Ages and even in the ancient world, educated people almost across the board believed that the earth was round, and that modern scholars, other than professors of history of science, and in the history of science, it's a consensus. I don't know of one that thinks that anything other than that educated Europeans in the ancient and medieval eras knew and believed and said that the earth was round and not flat. But it's astounding that even among the educated public, as Russell says here in this quote today, there are still many that believe that the people, even scientists, scholars, etc., of those earlier centuries believed exactly that. This is completely false. Lastly, another story that gets told. This one isn't quite as well known, but I've heard it brought up a number of times in people talking to me about Christianity, or I've heard it, on podcasts and radio shows, etc. A brilliant scholar of the ancient world named Hypatia of Alexandria, a secular philosopher, was supposedly killed for her pagan religious beliefs, a believer in the pagan gods, the Roman pagan gods of the time, by crazy, irrational Christians. So let's go through what really happened, because that claim, as you see, has been stamped by me as false, because it is false. In 415, Hypatia, a gifted and famous pagan teacher of mathematics and philosophy in Alexandria, Egypt, was murdered by Christians. That part of it's true. So sometimes the worst historical slanderers at least have a grain of truth in them, which sometimes make them even harder to combat, because it gives them at least a look of something being true, and then the rest of it kind of looks more possibly true. At least since the 18th century Enlightenment, this event has been used by opponents, these are my words now, mixed in with John Dixon's from Saints and Sinners. This event has been used by opponents of Christianity as a typical example of Christian zealotry and violence. In addition, as the story has it, the church was sending a message: we will not tolerate women or education. It's as ridiculous as it sounds, of course, at least to Christians. The incident marked the beginning of centuries of Christian misogyny and anti-intellectualism in the minds of many Europeans and later Americans. The only problem with it, as so often when Christian history is involved, is that it's not true, or at least it's only partially true, but so distorted that it's extremely misleading. A mob of Christians did kill Hypatia, and it's another unsavory moment in Christian history for sure. We've went over a list of atrocities and crimes and incidents of violence that Christians have no excuse for, and we shouldn't make excuses for such events. But as historian Edward Watts says, quote, "The awful fate of Hypatia had nothing to do with her being a woman or being educated. It even had little to do with religion. What actually happened is that the Roman governor of the province, Alexandria, Alexandria, Egypt, had asked Hypatia to use her fame and popularity to help calm civil tensions in Alexandria due to the newly installed Catholic bishop Cyril stirring social discontent. He disliked the governor for political reasons, and because Orestes sided with the local Jews during the ongoing swirling tensions. At one point, Orestes arrested and tortured one of Cyril's lieutenants. An outraged Cyril looked for revenge. Eventually, a group of Cyril's Christian supporters confronted Hypatia, now seen as an ally of the governor, and events spun out of control, and the brilliant mathematician was brutally murdered. So, although she was murdered by a group of Christians, there's much more politics behind this act of violence than there is religion, or more specifically Christianity. Far more. Going on to add the all-important context, the governor Orestes was a Christian who greatly admired Hypatia. Many Christians in the city sided with Orestes and Hypatia against their own bishop, and a leading Christian scholar in the city wrote a narrative of these events and praised Hypatia's learning and condemned the killers and the bishop. So it was what was left out of the popular story that has come down to us is that Christians were on sort of both sides of this issue, and many of them were outraged that these killings happened at the hands of Christian leaders and Christians in the community. So another case of claims being used against Christians from Christian history to make Christianity look bad. I'm sure many people believe these. Some of them may know that they're lies and use them anyway. Moving on to Church History 1000, somewhat tongue-in-cheek. We covered Church History 1A, which were the factual claims that are often made, or claims to factual analysis of events that are actually false. Now we move on to something that's a little more complicated, hence the fictitious title Church History 1000, a little more difficult. In college courses, the bigger numbers are usually reserved for classes that go into more depth and are higher level classes, graduate level classes, etc., etc. But I'm just using it to make the point that interpretation is a bit more tricky and a bit more messy. So we're going to look at two major matters of bad historical interpretation, followed by this wonderful quote from one of the most gifted Christian intellectuals alive today, David Bentley Hart, in one of many books called Atheist Delusions. You can see it at the bottom, The Christian Revolution and Its Fashionable Enemies. Bentley Hart, if you listen to him on YouTube for 2 minutes, you'll recognize how brilliant of an individual he is. He can be difficult to be around. He can sometimes be arrogant and lose his temper, but he's also a gifted writer, as I think you'll see from the quote. And this is, at least in a indirect sense, talking about interpretation of Christian history. He says, "It is not serious historians who, for the most part, form the historical consciousness of their times. It is bad popular historians, generally speaking, and the historical hearsay they repeat or invent. and the myths they perpetuate and simplifications they promote that tend to determine how most of us view the past. It is the simple picture that tends to prevail. And the simple picture is the story that Western society has been telling about itself for centuries now. So he's saying what most people know in our world, in our society right now, about history, at least when it comes to any issue that intersects with Christianity, is a simplistic story that usually is full of inaccurate or bad interpretations. He goes on by writing, one of its more venerable variants is that the faith that modern reason superseded was uniquely irrational and unprecedentedly hostile to the appeals of rationality. That in fact, this faith had barbarously purged Western culture of the high attainments of the classical world, had burned its books, abandoned its science, forsaken its pluralism, and had plunged the Western world into a millennium of mental squalor. Christianity, so the tale goes, induced the so-called Dark Ages by actively destroying the achievements of Roman culture. Here, the ghastly light of 1,000 inane legends burns with an almost inextinguishable incandescence. So, in typical brilliant form, he tears apart this interpretive myth about history, about Christian history. We're going to come back to that. We're going to first go to another important interpretive issue, but the one that Hart is outlining here, I think, is the most important one for Christians to actually get straight and understand, because it tells us a lot about the time we're living in and how hostile the culture, our culture, is to Christians and Christianity, and how much of an uphill battle it is and will be in the future for Christians to make a comeback, which I believe is desperately needed, as hard as it is. But let's talk about the Protestant Reformation first. As the renowned scholar Alistair McGrath says in the title of the book, he talks about Christianity's dangerous idea. Though he doesn't put a question mark next to it like I do. The dangerous idea is that the Bible should be read by everybody, not just religious leaders, officials, priests, pastors, etc. The priesthood of all believers, going back to Martin Luther at the beginning of the Reformation. So the claim that's often made is by non-Christians is that the Protestant Reformation was a revolutionary and dangerous radical break from Orthodox Christianity, meaning that it changed everything in Christendom and in an extremely negative, damaging way. This, I think, is easily overturned and easily shown to be false. At bottom, and now I'm reading again my own words, and mixed with quotes from a great scholar, in another pretty recent book, Gavin Ortlund, in What It Means to Be Protestant. But so I'm paraphrasing him here and quoting him, and have some of my own, verbiage mixed in. At bottom, Protestant was A, a return to the authority of Scripture, B, a removal of historical accretions, and C, the only promoter of true Catholicity. Now, before you Protestants jump out of your seats and immediately click this off because I said that the Protestant Reformation was a supporter and promoter of true Catholicity, keep in mind and recognize that it's not a capital C there, it's a small case C. The Catholic Church, right, translated from the original languages from the original just means universal. So the Roman Catholic Church is, yes, it took on the name universal and has claimed to be universal. But what's being said here is not a support of the Catholic Church itself. It's saying that Protestants actually are the real Christians who promote Catholicity in the sense of it being universal, in the sense of it having a chance to be spread all over the world successfully, and eventually even more successfully than it's spread there now. So it's not promoting the true Roman Catholic Church. It's promoting what C is saying, the only promoter of true Catholicity. It's saying that Protestantism is the actual promoter of a world, global, universal religion, not the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, the gentleman mentioned here, Gavin Ortlund, in the book mentioned here, and others, talks about a lot about and makes a pretty persuasive case that the Catholic Church actually has much less of a chance of being universalized, at least in the present day and in the future, than Protestant Christianity. To quote from Professor Ortlund, the nature of Protestantism, he writes, it was not an attempt to start a new church, but a movement of revitalization, renewal, return, reformation, recentering, recovery. Not an unqualified rejection of the rest of the church, but rather a movement of renewal and reform within the church, unquote. So that right gives the lie to the claim in the title that this was some sort of dangerous break from actual Christianity. It was totally irresponsible and had no reason even being really called Christian. He's saying no, this is the Protestant reformers were trying to go back to what they believe was the original purer form of Christianity that existed before the Catholic Church started, or at least before it became heavily institutionalized. If we go to the top, back to the top of the slide, under B, a removal of historical accretions. What that meant is the Protestant Reformation was trying to, and the reformers of the era, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, others, were trying to identify and take away those elements of Christianity that weren't backed by the Bible, but that had been put in there as accretions, additions, by the Catholic Church unacceptably in their minds. John Calvin himself said that, the same author, Ortlund, says of John Calvin that he pursued reform because the Reformation he perpetuated and advanced was committed to renewal. The reformers believed that their teachings, in contrast to Rome's, the Roman Catholic churches, were not only faithful to the sacred scriptures, but allegiant to the Catholic tradition, again, small c, that embodied, so universal tradition, that embodied those same biblical teachings. Rome failed to articulate such beliefs in a way that adhered to the Catholic tradition, in the sense of it being a global and globalizable, that's a word, religion. Calvin said to Rome, in essence, we are more Catholic than you. Our agreement with antiquity is far closer than yours. So we're more universal than you are, and more universalizable than you are, and our way of doing Christianity, our interpretation of Scripture and so forth, is more akin to the original church fathers and the Bible than yours is. Martin Luther, in this case, this is a quote from Luther. He said, there is much that is Christian and good. And again, I should forewarn you, this part might cause some feathers to be ruffled, at least initially, because we're not used to hearing Martin Luther say this. But I put at the bottom here, I put where this came from in Luther's writings and works. If you want to check up on this, go right ahead. He wrote, there is much that is Christian and good under the papacy. In the papal church, there are true holy scriptures, true baptism, the true sacrament of the altar, the true keys to the forgiveness of sins, the true office of the ministry, the true catechism in the form of the Lord's Prayer, the Ten Commandments, and the Articles of the Creed. So, what is he saying? I've changed my mind. Now I think that the Catholic Church is a-okay, and I give it a total thumbs up. No, he's not saying that at all. But he's saying something, to put it crudely, simply. We shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are, some really important issues, particularly with regard to soteriology and church ecclesiology, church hierarchy, that we vehemently disagree with, and it's what caused us to break away from the Roman Catholic Church in the end. But that doesn't mean that we believe that the church as a whole is illegitimate, and it's not Christ's church. Partly what Luther and Calvin agreed on this, as did most of the other big name reformers, that of course the Catholic Church was still the church in the Middle Ages before there was a Protestant Reformation. Otherwise, there would have been no Christians, at least not any that were practicing the faith in a way that brought them together for legitimate worship, etc., etc. So Luther is merely saying here, and this is, I think, is very much misunderstood today, and in this case, especially by Christians ourselves, that we think that we paint things as human beings, I think, almost naturally do, in kind of black or white terms, 100% this and 0% that, or vice versa. Luther he's not going back on anything that he said or did before. Right? He did take his stand at the Diet of Worms and said, "Here I stand." Right? I can do no other. He hadn't changed his mind on that at all. What he's saying, and what the reformers were saying, was that there are elements to the Catholic Church that are still legitimate. The problem is that the parts that we find illegitimate are so important and so serious that we, in a sense, had to break away. But there's still a recognition that it's not a zero-sum game. And the Roman Catholic Church is not all good or all, worthy of being thrown in the trash. So this part of it here, Luther's quote, again, might make Protestants uncomfortable, but I don't think it should. Luther is merely being, I think, honest and realistic here, and saying, of course there was a church in the Middle Ages. Of course there were Christians that worshipped legitimately. As much as the church leadership, from the Pope on down, was screwing things up, and he believed they were, as much corruption as there was, and on, which he believed there was, the church still remained, right? The bride of Christ was still there underneath all of that misappropriation, with all those misdeeds and misinterpretations, that the church was still there. It's just that it's gotten to a point now, says Luther and Calvin and others, that we think we needed to intervene to force a change, because those things we disagree with are of the essence and require intervention. As Matthew Barrett, another gifted scholar on this subject, who wrote a recent gigantic but excellent book called The Reformation as Renewal, says, the Reformers did not think the Reformation was primarily a revolution for new modern ideas, but a retrieval and renewal of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Again, Catholic with a small c, holy, right? One that could and should spread to the ends of the earth through the activity of missionaries, etc., etc. And that quote at the bottom gets us back to the top in rejecting the ridiculous interpretation that Protestant Christianity represented a dangerous and irresponsible break from the true Christianity. Nothing could be further from the truth. We all love a good story. We saw in last week's first part of this a quote from a scholar sort of laying out, in a sense, this same myth about the ongoing, unavoidable conflict between science and religion. And as I said here moments ago, I believe this is the most important thing to get straight by Christians themselves and non-Christians as well. This is the most important element of our society's understanding or lack of understanding of the way the modern world sees and processes the relationship between Christianity and science. Here we're looking at another really recent book. Almost all of my sources here are books written in the last 5 to 10 years at the most of them shorter than closer to the present than that. So the myth of modern secular progress and the Enlightenment project. The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement that for the most part spanned the 18th century. That is usually, I think, correctly seen by Christians and secular scholars alike as ushering in the modern Western world. And at the top of its list of values and changes that it was seeking to make, hence the term project, these were reformers in their own right, but they believed in a secular world, and they very much were extremely high about the possibilities and the already successful elements of science applied to the real world through technology, etc., etc. So Jamie Franklin, in a book called The Great Return, Why Only a Restoration of Christianity Can Save Western Civilization, it says that further down the slide. If anybody's interested in that book, it's also a fantastic read, though somewhat of a sobering one. Franklin says the founding myth of secular modernity tells us a story in which science and reason displaced religion, specifically Christianity. That displacement created the conditions for the civilized and prosperous world we know today. The benefits we enjoy, technology, medicine, education, democratic political systems, and so on, are the result of the shift away from a religious worldview and towards a scientific and rational one. Again, that's basically the same myth that we looked at in somewhat different words in one of the slides in the first episode of this lecture. This secular myth, Franklin continues, in its essentials is false. The patchwork quilt of anecdotes that undergirds this narrative is more similar in character to a fable or fairy tale than to historical reality. These anecdotes promote a mythical view of the emergence of science and reason from the darkness of the religious past. This mythology intentionally plays down the profound continuity between the Christian medieval period and the modern period, which is thought to have begun with the so-called scientific revolution. This is one of the things that's important for Christians and non-Christians alike to know, is that science was already being done. And so there isn't a big break between the medieval world where no science is being done and then the scientific revolution and enlightenment where science kind of took over and thankfully for the world saved it from irrationality and no science. Franklin, again, a little further on in his book, says the story in question, the story of the triumph of science and reason over Christianity, is extremely influential. It has found a home in each one of us, even those who are conventionally religious, and it gives us a sense of who we are and what we're about. This is a hard truth, I think, to come to grips with for all Christians, or most, and that is that we are products of this world and of this thought process, of this interpretation of reality this interpretation of Western history. Right? We live in the modern world, the modern scientific world, in all the ways mentioned. Christians have an advantage, I believe, because they have another, vantage point that, goes alongside or combats the mainstream culture. But all of us are to some degree immersed, Christian or not, in the mainstream culture because we have to have jobs and we have to go to school, and we can go to Christian schools to some degree and get employment at Christian institutions. But in many ways, we have no choice but to be part of the secular scientific worldview that dominates our culture. Franklin, yet again, further on, says the West has continued to propagate Christian ideas and has rebadged them, claiming that it discovered them using autonomous reason. The idea of the equal value of all people is perhaps the central and most important, transmitted to us from the Christian past, and derives ultimately from the Judeo-Christian notion of men and women created in the image of God. So he's making another claim here, another important one to understand, even by Christians. Some do, some might not have thought about this before, but the modern secular scientific worldview, the dominant one, that excludes Christianity for the most part and is increasing that exclusion, they actually have the audacity, oftentimes without even knowing it, but audacity still, to claim that the values that they support come from reason alone and have nothing to do with God, have nothing to do with the Bible, have nothing to do with Christianity, when you only have to sort of look at it for a time from a Christian point of view to see that they're actually taking ideas and values and ways of dealing with reality that come from a Christian background. So even their opposition to Christianity is oftentimes based, ironically, on Christian ideas that go way back into the past. So the myth of progress itself, chronologically, kind of looks like this, at least from the mainstream secular standpoint. There was the ancient world, the Greeks and the Romans, which made early progress in reason, science, even sort of religious thinking, according, again, to the modern way of viewing it, the modern non-Christian way. The medieval era that showed progress gets set back. What did White say? 1,500 years. The modern era, which starts with the Enlightenment, where progress triumphs, rational science beats out irrational Christianity, and in the future, where human society is supposed to perfect itself with reason alone, in some sort of utopia of reason, and with everything being scrubbed clean of Christianity, from educational institutions to corporations to government, etc., and science will triumph and lead us to a utopian or perfect or almost perfect future. Continuing this, we get back to the conflict thesis itself, essentially where we started the lecture, the first part of it last time, that religion and science are natural enemies. So made very well known by the two scholars already at least alluded to, John Mark Draper and his A History of the Conflict of Science and Religion, and Andrew Dickson White, A History of the Warfare of Science with Theology. These are the two professors, not well known at all now, but who had tremendous and ongoing, up until the present, influence on this idea that religion and science are natural enemies, always have been, always will be. Draper says the history of science is not a mere record of isolated discoveries. It is the narrative of the conflict of two contending powers, the expansive force of the human intellect on one side, and the compression arising from traditionary faith on the other. I guess traditionary was a common usage then. I've never seen it before. I read it here. The books promoted a leading scientific, were promoted by the two scholars here, a leading scientific cheerleader and publisher with lots of money named Edward Youmans, Youmans with a Y, and a leading historian of science at the time, George Sarton. Due to their publicizing of conflict and warfare, the two books and the thesis that came out of it, the myths and errors of Draper and White began to take over like an invasive species, says Hutchins et al. In Of Popes and Unicorns. So this is a strange story indeed. It's amazing how much influence these two books, these two professors had and have, especially since hardly anyone knows who they are today. But all of this is mainstream popular culture now. Dan Brown, in his Origins, one of the characters there says the church's systematic murder, imprisonment, and determination of some of history's brightest minds delayed human progress by at least a century. At least he doesn't say 15 centuries, but at least indirectly he appears to have been influenced by Draper and White, if not more directly. I don't know. These conflicts I have described, those in which religious superstition has trumped reason, are merely skirmishes in an ongoing war. For centuries, most of the devout have looked past vast amounts of scientific data and rational logic in defense of their faith. So this is sort of the blind, Christians base decisions on blind faith, and we more responsible and smarter people of science, take things based on evidence and only act accordingly. The scholarly community in the history of science has rejected the thesis, conflict thesis, overwhelmingly. As I already said, I have a few more quotes here. I had some on a previous slide. Peter Harrison, one of the best historians of science to read on this subject, says the myth of a perennial conflict between science and religion is one to which no historian of science would subscribe. In his book Christianity and the Rise of Western Science. Alister McGrath, another big name in the field. The idea that the natural sciences and religion have been permanently at war with each other is now no longer taken seriously by any historian of science. That written fairly recently. One further author, Jeff Harden, in a book called The Warfare Between Science and Religion, The Idea That Wouldn't Die. I like the latter part of the title. Although rejected by every historian of science today, the conflict or warfare model for the historical interaction of science and religion remains not only widespread, but naturalized as a fact in popular culture. Like a pernicious biological species introduced into a new environment, the conflict thesis has proven difficult to eradicate despite the continued efforts of the scholars best qualified for the task. I, at the risk of repeating myself in a rather boring fashion, I would reiterate that Christians especially need to take note of these kind of things, because this is such a widespread myth that's presented as a fact or series of facts that I think Christians oftentimes are prone to think, well, God, there's got to be something to this. I hear it, see it everywhere. Everybody seems to believe it, even fellow Christians sometimes. But it has had a shocking shelf life, since it's not true at all, or at least the extreme nature of the way the issue is framed is not true at all. A true story, though a tragedy. The crucial transition from pre-modern to modern morality. So in this case, I'm zeroing in on something more specific, and that's morality or ethics. So let's do kind of a before and after picture here of the evolution of moral thought, moral philosophy in the Western world. So before the 18th century Enlightenment, which sometimes is referred to as the pre-modern world, human beings, this is my own words now, human beings had purpose and meaning, a teleology, teleology means purpose and meaning, that human beings were going somewhere. There was an inherent, Christians believe, God ordained goal or series of goals set out by family, community, vocation, God. Things outside of themselves that help direct and orient their lives. So you had not just one goal necessarily, but you were headed towards multiple objectives and goals, and it really wasn't your option to do so. Not that you'd be arrested and put in jail, but the society's values were such in the pre-modern era in the Western world that you were supposed to, move in the direction of, focusing more attention on God, giving your life up to God, making God, putting God first, pursuing a vocation, doing what you're supposed to do, your duty with regard to family and family members of different, children, parents, grandparents, etc. And so there was an objective, factual way to assess morality. A man is supposed to do this based on his purpose. And it provided a great deal of stability and a sort of sense of meaning. People, I think, weren't as lost, feeling kind of like, what's the point of everything? Why am I here? There was more of a sort of given sense of, I know why I'm here. It's all been sort of set out for me, and it makes sense. Not that every aspect of life prior to the Enlightenment was better than life today. I'll take certain modern conveniences any day over some things before, but I think we underestimate the degree to which this had a great deal, was a great deal comforting to people that lived during the pre-modern period. If human beings fail to make progress for one person, he can be considered to have failed as a fact. Not just an opinion that you failed, but you had this obligation to your family. You had this obligation to God, and you didn't do it your whole life. You failed. It wasn't just an opinion. It was much easier to see it and discuss it and think of it as a fact. There is what he is doing, any single person, and there is what he ought to be doing or ought to have done. And these were often seen, usually seen, as objective. Human beings had firmly set function and ends that were moral obligations, even moral laws, regardless of their own dreams. So you had moral obligations, again, not necessarily by law, but by custom, by the expectation of the culture, your family, your school teachers, and on and on. And if you didn't live up to those, you were an outcast. There were various ways in which you were, put to shame for it. Regardless of what your dreams were, your dreams weren't taken as, one individual's dreams weren't taken as seriously as they are today, since the Enlightenment in the modern world. This originally had come from Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, but fit Christian thinking well, with theistic or God, the one God, purposes attached and added. Right? The idea of teleology or purpose and meaning fits well with the Christian God and a theistic, worldview. What about in the Enlightenment and after, meaning ever since, up until the present? Human beings no longer today, and this has been increasingly true since the Enlightenment, no longer have a set outside purpose, a teleology, not sort of a set, set of goals that they're supposed to achieve, and so they don't have purpose and meaning. Human beings are individuals. They're supposed to be autonomous and use their reason to go and do whatever they want, wherever they want to, however they want to, as long as they're not committing crimes and hurting other people. And there are no more intrinsic built-in moral obligations that society kind of hands to you and expects you to obey, even if you don't absolutely have to. since people are now free to do what they please. They're not just free to do what they please now, right? In the present, people are encouraged to do what they please. Just do it. Just do whatever the heck you want. If other people don't like it, and if you're breaking obligations or promises to other people, too bad. If you feel it's right, do it. And feeling is important in a way that it hadn't been before. Since there's no longer any foundation for moral absolutes, meaning certainties, there's no basis for morality to have any factual content whatsoever. So it becomes mere choice, opinion, or what one feels is right. Since when does, well, I feel this is what I should do? Since when do our feelings a good guide to what we should do with our lives? But you see it in the movies, on TV, you hear people talking about it online, or people talking about, well, I feel this is the right thing to do. Yeah, well, good luck with that. This all-important transition that we're talking about here in terms of moral thinking in the long run brought what we now call sometimes the fact-value dichotomy, which means that the world of empirical science and instrumental reason is where facts live, and morality and religion are consigned to the realm of values or opinions. And so how often do we hear this, Christians and non-Christians alike, and we tend to buy into it, that there are facts, and science is based on facts, and there are values, facts separated from values, or opinions. So you hear things, if you're a Christian and someone isn't, but they're being friendly and being nice about it. You're a Christian. You've become a Christian. Oh, good for you. You found something that works for you. In a sense, implying, well, it's your opinion that Christianity is the right religion or the true religion, and good for you. You're entitled to your opinion. But there's a strong sort of separation, a firewall between facts and values today that there wasn't before, going all the way back to Aristotle, the ancient Greeks, up until the end of the pre-modern period and the Enlightenment. There wasn't this dichotomy, or it was in the making, but it wasn't the dominant way of thinking about these kind of questions and issues. This has all had catastrophic consequences, I believe. By taking away humans having a preset purpose, a teleology, the modern secular scientific world has been saddled with relativism, expressive individualism, factionalism, confusion, depression, hopelessness, despair, and I could go on. Without the Christian Aristotelian system of thought, humanity has no unity, foundation, or solid base with which to orient ourselves individually or collectively in the world. We have no clear or objective purpose, all of which coincides with what science has told us for decades and beyond. Existentialism posits that life has no meaning and is therefore absurd. Existentialists believe that you have to carve out your own meaning. You create your own meaning, and as long as you're consistent with that meaning, that's good. But you get to decide what your meaning is, what your values are. So if your values are, I want to help people that are in need, and you're consistent with it, well, that's, existentialists would applaud. But if they're being logically consistent, they'd also have to applaud if you decided the opposite. Well, I've dedicated my life to hurting as many people as possible, and I've been very consistent about it. So good for you. You are a moral person indeed. All of this stuff, not just existentialism, but all of these kind of relative moralities, or non-absolute moral theories, are all, I think, prone to disaster because it becomes kind of an anything goes world under such thinking. Much of what I read or from the screen here is paraphrased from another gifted scholar, this one going back to the 80s and before, Alasdair MacIntyre, in his classic after virtue, a classic in moral philosophy in its history. So some of this is my own words, some of it's paraphrased from him. So, all we have that is good today comes from the science and the subtraction of Christian influence. Right? There's the idea of subtraction, that the world was just kind of waiting to become more rational and better, but Christianity and religion in general were holding it up. And once we subtracted religion or started, subtracting it more and more, the world got better. So the Christian influence here got in the way of progress, so the myth or mythical story goes. Our concept of the person, inherent human dignity, right, man created in God's image, led to human rights and equality. The strong must defend the weak and work to stop their exploitation. So, what I'm doing here is showing us that something I already alluded to before briefly, and that is that non-Christians, whether atheists or nuns in the N-O-N-E-S sense, agnostics, people of other faiths, right? They often believe the subtraction theory, sometimes without knowing what it's called, without realizing how much of their own outlook, how much of their own worldview can be traced back to Christianity. So our concept of the person, our concept of the home, early Christian emphasis on family as society's most important unit of togetherness, railing against exploiters of women and kids, the nuclear family, women and children today seen as persons in the same way as men, same outrage and mobilization to stop exploitation. So, right, the concept of the person goes back to, the Bible itself, human dignity, man created, in the Imago Dei, image of God. This helped lead to the modern concepts, even non-religious ones, so they say, of human rights and equality. Same with the home. Our concept of work comes from the dignity of each person, right? Again, back to the Bible, back to Christianity, back to Judaism, led to the dignity of honest, hard work of any kind, which certainly had at least something to do with the modern work ethic, and also likely had some impact on people in the Western world developing eventual critiques of slavery. Our concept of religion redefined what connection the divinity looked like. So God is love, and union with Him is open to all. Right? So today, translated into right, a similar value, just a non-religious one, modern inclusiveness and the importance of unity in the world. All kinds of social movements and organizations based on ideas that they often don't realize stem in part from Christianity. Our current concept of community. Christians looked outside from the church and instead of isolating, got involved in charity in the ancient world and beyond, the Middle Ages, and poor, whether Christian or not, which helps lead to the modern concept of community, looking out for everyone in the community equally. Our concept of death, life, death, afterlife, right, coming from the early centuries of Christianity. But how does that have anything to do with our outlook on death today? Well, we have kind of a very vibrant outlook on life in the modern world, which has led to creative expression in art, music, literature, etc. So life, death, with afterlife in the Christian sense is an optimistic way, certainly in the end, of seeing human life going on, and people living happily ever after in the afterlife. Our concept of government. Similarly, Christians believed there was a higher power than government. uh, God, kings, and emperors started to believe they were not above civil or God's law. Today, right, we can see if we trace this, back far enough and connect the threads, democracy, individual rights that government cannot violate, freedom of religion, separation of powers, checks and balances, a government of laws, voting one's conscience, all of these things have at least part of their origins in Christian belief going back centuries. Our concept of truth, same thing. Christians use theology and philosophy to search for universal truths. Today, modern society, as non-religious as most of it is, still venerates truth or the truth. Their truths might be different, but they still respect truth and think it's important. Life and death, eternal perspective on life and the universe from the Christian point of view, going all the way back to the beginnings of the faith 2,000 years ago, led to people attempting to gain in the modern world non-religious way of thinking to gain perspective when trying to acquire knowledge and insight. This can be seen as sort of another, stealing from or being influenced by Christianity, usually without recognizing it. And our concept of time, salvation history, right, in the ancient Christian world and beyond. Life has God given an objective meaning and purpose, which we've already talked about, and that we fast forward to the modern world and we see history in our own time uh, itself is seen as linear. Our societies do still have long-term goals. They just aren't religious or spiritual ones, God-based ones any longer. And the idea of social reform, long-term goals of equality and better race relations, etc., etc. And that ends our talk, our two-part series on defending the faith against false claims.